In January of 1854, deep within the silent corridors of a Virginia plantation house, a midwife laid her trembling hands upon a newborn boy and froze. The child, though healthy in every way, bore a hand that defied nature. 6 fingers, each bone perfect, each knuckle real, each nail pink and living. Outside that small birthing room waited 3 men, bound not by fate but by greed. Brothers who each claimed to be the child's father. And the woman who just brought this child into the world was not their wife in any holy sense, but their purchase. A woman whose skin was the color of salt and moonlight, whose hair shimmered like cobwebs spun in snow. An albino slave bought in New Orleans for 4th and Zalozen, and forced into a marriage shared by 3 brothers, desperate to preserve their inheritance. That 6-fingered baby would become the symbol of everything they'd tried to hide, a living curse carved from their own corruption, for what began as a contract of desperation soon became a haunting no church dared bless and no historian dared record. But before we unearth what truly happened inside that plantation, before we uncover how a single woman's body became the battleground for bloodline, power, and the ruin of a Virginia dynasty, I want you to do one thing. Hit that subscribe button right now, and down in the comments, tell me where you're listening from. Are you in Virginia, Georgia, the Carolinas? Because this story isn't buried as deep as you think. Pieces of it still whisper through the soil of the South. Now, close your eyes for a moment. Picture 3 brothers, standing shoulder to shoulder as the will of their father is read aloud. The ink that binds them thicker than blood, the law demanding something unnatural. A singular union, the document said. A marriage that would keep the land whole, the blood pure, and the name Rutled unbroken. It was a clause that would twist 3 men's souls into one monstrous decision. A decision that would lead them straight to her. The woman whose white skin would one day give birth to a child marked by 6 fingers and 1,000 sins. The Rutled plantation stretched over 800 acres of Virginia soil, its tobacco fields rolling like a green ocean under the July sun. 3 generations had built it, each brick in the mansion pressed from profit and pride. When Josiah Rutled died suddenly in the spring of 1852, his 3 sons stood at his grave with more fear than grief. They weren't mourning their father. They were calculating the cost of his legacy. Samuel, the eldest, was all command and caution, 34 years old with a jaw carved from iron and a stare that brokered no argument. Thomas, 3 years younger, was the thinker, his fingers always stained with ink and worry. And William, the youngest, tall and too tender for the world his brothers ruled, had once studied scripture before tragedy dragged him home. For days after the funeral, the brothers waited for the will to be read. They knew Josiah had been strict about lineage, obsessed with the purity of the Rutled name, but nothing could have prepared them for the clause Chester Havford, the family's attorney, read aloud on that sweltering April afternoon. The inheritance, all land, houses, assets, and holdings, would remain theirs only if the 3 brothers entered into a single union that preserved the purity of their bloodline. 1 union, 1 wife, 1 heir. If the condition wasn't met within 3 years, every acre would be sold, every dollar handed to the Virginia Agricultural Society. The brothers would be left with $300 each, a humiliating sum for men who dined from silver and signed their names in fine ink. Samuel's first reaction was disbelief. Thomas's was panic. William's was prayer. But Havford only adjusted his spectacles and said quietly, "Your father believed division would destroy this estate. He wished you to remain united. By blood, by law, by marriage." Silence filled the study, thick as the scent of tobacco smoke. Samuel turned from the window and said what all 3 knew but dared not speak. "Then we must find a woman who cannot refuse." That night, as the Virginia wind hissed through the oaks, they plotted the unthinkable. A shared wife, bound to all 3 brothers, enslaved to their inheritance. A solution disguised as a sin. And somewhere in the distance, unseen and waiting, fate had already chosen her. A pale ghost in chains who would one day birth the child with 6 fingers. The plan began in silence, a secret forged in the flicker of lamplight inside the Rutled study. Samuel handled the practicalities. Thomas tracked the ledgers, the travel expenses, the auctions to watch. William sat apart, his Bible open but unread, his fingers tracing verses he no longer believed. In June of 1852, Hafford sent word of an upcoming sale in New Orleans. Among the listings, a young female, pale of complexion, domestic trained, of sound body and delicate constitution, unique. That single word, unique, sealed it. The brothers would travel south. The journey from Richmond to Louisiana took 6 days. 6 days of rehearsing rationalizations. Samuel told himself this was survival, not sin. Thomas whispered about inheritance, not cruelty. William prayed to a God who had stopped answering months ago. By the time they arrived, the swamp air smelled like sweat and consequence. The auction house on Chartres Street was no cathedral, but men came to it with the same reverence. Iron balconies above, sawdust underfoot, voices sharp as blades. Behind partitions, human beings waited to be weighed and sold. And there in the farthest corner stood a girl so pale she seemed carved from frost. She was 19 at most. Her hair fell in silken strands the color of ash. Her eyes, faintly pink, darted downward when spoken to. Her skin glowed like candle wax, untouched by the sun. She was beautiful in a way that frightened people, beautiful like something that shouldn't exist. "Gentlemen," the auctioneer said with oily pride, or true rarity. Born in South Carolina, trained for household service, sound in mind and limb. Full albino, a marvel of nature. Samuel circled her like a predator studying prey. Thomas kept glancing away. William couldn't move at all. When asked her name, she spoke so quietly it seemed the room leaned forward to hear it. "Clara." The bidding started at 1,000. It ended at 4,000, an obscene fortune for a single soul. But to the brothers it was a bargain for salvation. By dusk, the papers were signed, the coin exchanged, and Clara was led into the blistering sunlight, her wrists still red from old chains. The brothers didn't speak for the entire journey home. They didn't have to. Each of them knew what she had been bought for, and what she would be forced to become. The train from Louisiana cut through marsh and meadow, through silence and guilt. Clara sat in the last car, hands folded in her lap, staring through the glass as if the landscape itself might deliver her from what was coming. Samuel read newspapers. Thomas sketched out logistics for the Union. William whispered fragments of psalms that sounded more like apologies. When they reached Richmond, autumn was just beginning, cool winds, dry leaves, the season when the air smelled faintly of endings. The plantation staff had been told only that Mistress Samuel's bride would arrive soon. None were told the truth, that she would be wife to all 3 men, bound by paper and silence. On the second night back, Samuel summoned Clara to the parlor. Thomas and William stood behind him. The fire threw long shadows across the floorboards. "Clara," Samuel said, his tone that of a man giving orders, not vows. "You are to be my wife, but you will also belong to my brothers. You will bear an heir, one child, rightful in name and blood. In return, you will be provided for and protected. You will live well if you obey. Do you understand?" Her voice barely reached them. "Yes, sir." Thomas's face twitched, but he said nothing. William crossed himself. Samuel continued, "In public, you'll be Mrs. Samuel Rutled. In private, you'll serve each of us equally. Fail in your duty, and you will regret it." There was a pause so heavy it felt alive. Then Clara raised her head, eyes gleaming in the firelight. "When is the wedding?" 2 weeks, Samuel said. That night, as the brothers walked the hall outside her room, William muttered, "God will damn us for this." Samuel's reply came cold and quick. "Then he can stand in line." At the wedding, she wore white lace that turned her into something half woman, half spirit. Guests whispered about her complexion, about her strange beauty. No one dared ask where she'd come from. But as she stood beside Samuel, her lips moving through vows she didn't choose, Clara thought not of obedience, but of escape. And to all who listen now, type these words in the comments to seal this truth within you. The pale remember. Write it twice. Then keep listening. The wedding feast was a blur of laughter that didn't reach anyone's eyes. The local families who attended only saw what they wanted to see. The eldest Rutled brother marrying a strange but beautiful woman. No one questioned the absence of her family, her silence, or the tremor in her hands. The house shone that night like a shrine built to hypocrisy. When the guests left and the candles burned low, the brothers' pact began its quiet horror. Samuel led Clara upstairs, first his steps heavy, deliberate. Thomas followed hours later, shaking, sickened by what he was bound to do. William came last, his guilt so fierce he could barely look at her. The union was complete by dawn. By law, by will, and by sin, she now belonged to them all. In the days that followed, the plantation moved as it always had. The workers labored, the overseers shouted, and the brothers smiled to keep suspicion at bay. But inside those walls, something began to change. Clara carried silence like armor. She obeyed, she served, she spoke only when spoken to. Yet her eyes, those strange pink eyes, never lost their light. There was thought there, memory, and something deeper, defiance. It was Thomas who first noticed the cracks forming. He would pass her in the hallway and catch her humming hymns he hadn't heard since childhood. Songs his mother once sang before she died in childbirth. Songs his father forbade. "Where did you learn that?" he asked one morning. Clara didn't look at him. "My mother sang it when she was sold." Thomas said nothing, but the words stayed with him like a thorn under skin. Samuel treated her as a possession, not a partner. To him, she was only a vessel for the future heir. William, on the other hand, treated her with a gentleness that shamed him. He'd leave small kindnesses. A book, an apple, a pressed flower. He'd whisper that he was sorry even when she wouldn't look at him. By the winter of 1853, the brothers' unity began to rot. Jealousy replaced duty. Samuel noticed William's glances. Thomas stopped writing, stopped sleeping. Clara's presence became a mirror reflecting everything vile in them. And then, one morning in February, Clara collapsed in the garden. The doctor was summoned from Richmond. His verdict was simple: she was with child. Samuel smiled. Thomas turned away. William wept. None of them yet knew that what grew inside her would not just bear the Rutled name. It would end it. Winter melted into a slow, uneasy spring. The news of Clara's pregnancy spread across the plantation like wildfire, whispered between servants and field hands who had long learned not to speak their thoughts aloud. To them, the mistress of the house had always seemed more apparition than woman. Pale, quiet, untouchable. Now she carried life inside her, and the brothers' world shifted under its own weight. Samuel walked taller. He ordered new furniture, new linens, a cradle carved from imported oak. The Rutled heir would soon arrive, and with him the land, the title, the future. He treated Clara like an investment nearing maturity, his voice always clipped with expectation. "You will rest. You will eat. You will not stray from this house," he said one morning as she stood by the window, watching the dawn. She only nodded, hands resting lightly on her swelling belly. Thomas had grown silent, lost in his journals. He documented everything: her diet, her symptoms, the shape of her face. Yet in the margins, his handwriting twisted into confession. "She dreams aloud. She says names that are not ours. Sometimes I think she's calling to something older than us." William, unable to bear the guilt, avoided the house by day. At night, he'd sit by her door, listening for her breathing. Sometimes she would wake and speak softly through the wood. "Do you think a child born from sin can ever be free?" And he, trembling, would answer, "God forgives all things." Her reply, faint but steady, "Then he must be busy." By midsummer, the tension between the brothers had sharpened to something dangerous. Samuel accused William of weakness, of being too tender. Thomas accused Samuel of cruelty. Words became fists, and fists became silence. The doctor visited again and left pale-faced, muttering about strange signs. The child's heartbeat too strong, movements too frequent. "Like there's two hearts," he said under his breath before Samuel dismissed him with a glare. That night, a storm ripped through the valley. The house trembled, glass rattling in the panes, and from Clara's room came a sound that froze every man who heard it. A voice, low and unearthly, singing the same hymn Thomas remembered from his mother. Only this time it was not sorrowful. It was a warning. In the hallway, Thomas whispered, "It's her mother's song again." William shook his head. "No," he said, voice breaking. "That isn't her mother." And beyond the door, as lightning lit the room, Clara's eyes were open, wide, wild, glowing faintly pink in the dark, as if something ancient inside her had just awakened. By late August, the plantation lived under a hush so thick it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. The brothers barely spoke to one another. Servants walked on quiet feet, avoiding the east wing where Clara now remained confined. The doctor refused to return. And every night, the sound of her humming drifted through the corridors like smoke. The same old hymn, now slower, almost mournful. Her body changed rapidly, unnaturally. She grew weaker, and yet her eyes shone brighter, almost fevered. The midwife, an older enslaved woman named Ruth, was the only one who dared approach her room. She brought broth, wiped Clara's forehead, and whispered prayers over her belly. One night, Ruth came to Thomas trembling. "Sir, that baby don't kick like no baby I've felt before," she said. "It moves like it's searching." Thomas dismissed her at first, but when he saw Clara the next morning, he could not ignore it. Her pulse raced, her skin clammy, her expression far too calm. "Clara, are you in pain?" he asked. She looked at him, a faint smile ghosting her lips. "Pain means I'm still here," she whispered. "Samuel refused to hear of illness or fear. She'll give birth before harvest. Then this madness ends." He began ordering new deeds prepared, a family portrait commissioned, the nursery painted pale blue. He spoke as if control could banish consequence. William grew more haunted by the day. He would sit beneath Clara's window at dusk, his face hidden in his hands, murmuring scripture that no longer gave comfort. "Be not deceived," he whispered. "God is not mocked." Then came the night the house awoke to screams. Ruth burst from Clara's room, her apron soaked red, her eyes wide with terror. "It's time," she cried. "But something ain't right." The brothers rushed inside. Thunder cracked above as the wind howled through the shutters. Clara lay on the bed, sweat streaming down her temples, her breath shallow but steady. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "Don't be afraid," she said. "He's coming." The storm raged harder. Candles flickered out one by one. In the dim light, Thomas saw something that froze his blood. Clara's hand gripping the bedsheet, her knuckles straining, and on her own fingers, a faint swelling, as though her body itself was mirroring what it carried. An hour later, the storm broke, and so did the silence. A cry rang out, not one cry, but two, overlapping, echoing, unearthly. Ruth collapsed to her knees, sobbing, "Lord have mercy, it's not possible." Clara's eyes opened, unfocused but certain. "Don't you see?" she whispered to the trembling men around her. "He bears the mark, just like them." And when Samuel lifted the newborn for the first time, his breath caught in his throat. On the child's right hand, 6 perfect fingers curled around his own. The storm passed before sunrise, leaving the world heavy and still. The fields outside lay soaked, the trees bent under the weight of rain. Inside the great house, a different kind of silence took hold, the kind that comes after something sacred has been broken. The child lay wrapped in linen beside Clara, asleep but restless. His breathing was deep, rhythmic, yet strange, as if 2 chests were rising and falling inside one tiny body. The midwife, Ruth, kept her distance. "I ain't touching that babe again," she murmured. "Something ain't right with him. He don't cry like other children do." She was right. The boy had not cried once since birth. He had opened his eyes, pale grey, rimmed faintly with pink, mirrors of his mother's, and simply stared. When Samuel tried to hold him again, the infant's gaze fixed on him until Samuel had to look away. "He knows," William whispered, trembling. "He shouldn't know anything, but he knows." Samuel barked for silence, furious at his brother's fear. "He's my heir, our heir. This is what we fought for." But as he turned toward Clara, his voice faltered. She was awake, her face white as the pillow, her eyes unfocused. "Clara," he said, "you've done your duty. Rest." Her lips moved, cracked and dry. "You don't understand," she breathed. "You think he's yours." Samuel frowned. "What do you mean?" Her gaze sharpened, almost cruel. "He doesn't belong to any of you." Before Samuel could answer, she closed her eyes and fell into sleep so deep the midwife thought she'd gone. Ruth crossed herself and backed away, muttering prayers under her breath. Over the next days, Clara barely spoke. The baby thrived unnaturally fast. By the end of the first week, he could focus his eyes, grasp fingers, and follow voices. William began spending hours by the cradle, whispering hymns to him, as if trying to calm something unseen. Thomas filled page after page with sketches of the child's hands, writing notes about genetic peculiarity and unrecorded inheritance anomalies, trying to reason what faith and fear could not. Samuel alone refused to see it, until the 7th night. He went to the nursery and found the baby awake, staring at the window. As lightning flashed across the room, the child smiled, not the unformed twitch of an infant, but a deliberate, knowing curl of the mouth. Samuel stumbled back. "What are you?" he whispered. From the bed, Clara's weak voice drifted through the dark. "Is the cost you refused to pay." Outside, thunder rolled once more, and deep in the fields, every hound on the plantation began to howl. The howling of the dogs did not stop that night. It rolled through the valley until dawn, echoing off the riverbanks, as if the earth itself were warning them. None of the brothers slept. Samuel sat in his study, a bottle of whiskey untouched before him. Thomas locked himself in the library, scratching equations and bloodlines into parchment until his hands shook. William prayed in the chapel until his voice cracked. Only Clara slept, or seemed to. Her breathing shallow, her hands folded over her stomach where life had been and something else had taken its place. By morning, the servants were whispering. The cook refused to enter the nursery. Ruth swore she saw shadows moving under the cradle when no one stood there. "He ain't right, Mr. Samuel," she whispered. "That child's got an old spirit. He looks at me like he's counting my years." Samuel fired her before noon. "No more talk of superstition," he ordered. "The Rutled name will not be mocked by whispers." But the whispers grew anyway. The baby, named Elias, grew stronger by the day, faster than nature allowed. At 2 weeks old, his grip could bruise. At 3, his eyes followed every movement in the room, calculating alert. When he smiled, it unnerved everyone. There was nothing innocent in it. One evening, Thomas tried to measure his hands for another entry in his notes. The infant looked straight into his eyes and, with a soft coo, closed his 6-fingered hand around Thomas's thumb. Thomas froze. His pulse stopped for a moment. "Samuel," he whispered, "he's not a defect. He's evolution." Samuel slammed the notebook shut. "He's an heir." Nothing more. But William saw it differently. He began sneaking into Clara's room late at night, kneeling beside her bed, whispering desperate questions. "What did you mean? He's not ours. What did you bring here?" Clara would only stare toward the cradle in the corner. "You called him into this world," she murmured. "All I did was open the door." By September, the house itself began to change. Lamps flickered without wind. Doors swelled shut, then opened on their own. The air felt heavier, charged. Even Samuel began to sense something watching him from the hall mirrors. Something small, silent, and patient. Then, one night, the crying began. Not the baby's. It came from the walls, faint at first, then clearer. A woman's voice, whispering the same old hymn, verse by verse, until every flame in the house dimmed. Clara rose from her bed and walked barefoot to the nursery. She stood above the cradle and whispered, "Mother, he's awake now." And from the cradle came a sound that did not belong to any child, a low, shivering laugh that silenced even the wind outside. After that night, the Rutled house was never still again. The laughter, faint, shivering, too old for an infant, lingered in the corners of every room. The servants began to flee one by one, leaving behind their pay and their belongings. By October, the only souls left within those walls were the 3 brothers, Clara, and the child who never cried. Samuel tried to keep the estate running as if nothing had changed. He rode the fields each morning, barking orders, pretending not to hear the echoes that followed him down the paths. But when he returned each evening, his eyes grew darker, his hands trembling as though the reins burned him. "The men say the baby watches them from the windows," Thomas told him one afternoon. Samuel snapped, "Then tell them to stop looking." Thomas had stopped writing entirely. His notebooks, once full of notes and sketches, now held only fragments of prayers. He avoided the nursery, avoided Clara, avoided even the mirrors. He'd begun to dream of his mother, calling his name from the halls, her voice woven with Clara's song. "Do you hear her too?" he asked William one night. William nodded, his eyes hollow. "She sings to him," he said. When the candles go out, it was true. Every night, Clara sang that same hymn, the one the brothers remembered from childhood, the one their mother used to hum when she thought no one listened. Now Clara's voice carried it down the corridors like a curse. Sometimes when she stopped, another voice, smaller, higher, finished the verse for her. By mid-October, the brothers were barely speaking. Samuel slept in his office with a pistol under his pillow. Thomas had grown thin, sickly, muttering to himself about bloodlines bending backward. William's faith had cracked entirely. He no longer prayed, only stared at the child as though trying to see the hand of God and the devil at once. One night, a storm rose over the plantation, fierce and sudden, like the one that had marked Elias's birth. Lightning tore through the sky, shaking the walls. In the nursery, the cradle rocked on its own. The door burst open, and all three brothers rushed inside at once. Clara sat upright in bed, her face pale as ever, her hair unbound. The child was standing in the cradle, tiny hands gripping the edge, 6 fingers curled around the wood, steady and strong. Samuel froze. "That's not possible." Clara's voice was soft, almost kind. "You wanted an heir. You have one." Lightning flashed again. For an instant the brothers swore they saw another figure behind her, a woman tall, veiled in shadow, with eyes that glowed the same pale pink. Then the light vanished and the room was dark. When the thunder passed, Elias laughed again, that same ancient, echoing sound, and every mirror in the house shattered at once. Morning came grey and silent, the kind of silence that follows a scream. Shards of glass still littered the floors where mirrors had burst, each one reflecting fragments of faces that no longer seemed whole. The house smelled of rain, iron, and something older, something that didn't belong to this world. Samuel ordered the servants to clean it all, but none would enter the east wing. When he tried to drag one by the arm, the man broke free and fled down the dirt road without a word. By sundown, the plantation stood empty except for the Rutleds, Clara, and the child. Thomas spent hours sweeping up the shards himself, muttering verses under his breath. He paused once to study a piece of broken glass and saw his reflection, only it wasn't his alone. A second face hovered just behind his shoulder, pale and smiling. When he turned, there was no one there. He didn't sleep that night, nor the next. Clara, confined to her bed, seemed to grow stronger as the men around her decayed. She barely ate, barely moved, yet her skin glowed faintly in the candlelight. The boy, Elias, rarely left her arms now. His eyes followed everything, as though he were listening to something the others couldn't hear. William was the first to break. He came to Samuel one evening, his hands shaking. "I saw her," he whispered. "Our mother." She stood in the hall. She was singing to him. Samuel slammed his fist against the desk. "You saw nothing! You've let madness in!" But William's voice cracked, raw and certain. She said the same words father did before he died. "Keep the blood whole. Don't you see, Samuel? We've done what he wanted. We kept it too whole. So whole it turned back on itself." Samuel struck him hard enough to send him sprawling. "You'll hold your tongue, or I'll have you sent to the asylum." But when Samuel stormed from the room, William stayed on the floor, whispering to the shadows, maybe that's what he meant all along. That night, Thomas found his youngest brother hanging from the rafters of the chapel, the Bible open beneath his feet. On the page, one verse had been underlined in shaking ink, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked." When Samuel came, he did not weep. He ordered the body buried by morning unmarked. But Clara, from her bed, whispered as the shovels scraped the earth, 1 down, 2 to go. And from the nursery the child laughed again, softly, almost joyfully, each giggle counting like the tolling of a bell. The morning after William's burial, the fog did not lift. It rolled across the fields like a tide, swallowing fences, barns and trees until the world beyond the porch ceased to exist. Inside, the air felt damp and heavy. Even the clock seemed slower. Samuel drowned himself in work, though there was none left to do. He stalked the halls like a soldier in an empty fortress, barking orders to ghosts. Thomas, meanwhile, had stopped eating. He sat at his desk surrounded by old ledgers and family Bibles, tracing the Rutled line back 200 years. His quill scratched endlessly through the night. It was there, in the yellowed pages of a forgotten family record, that he found it. A small note written in their great-grandfather's hand, "The firstborn of every 3rd generation shall bear the mark of the Watcher. Keep the blood whole, or the door will close forever." The words chilled him. Beneath them, an old sketch, a crude drawing of a child with 6 fingers on one hand and a halo of fire around his head. "The Watcher," Thomas whispered. Not a curse, a continuation. He gathered his papers, shaking, and went to Samuel's office. "It's not a deformity," he said. "It's prophecy. Every third generation, one child is born different. Father knew. That's why he forced the clause in the will. He wanted this." Samuel's eyes flashed. "You mean to say Father wanted this abomination?" Thomas slammed the record on the desk. "It's not abomination. It's blood." He called it the Watcher, Samuel. "He believed our line was chosen to bear it. Look at the pattern. Our great-grandfather Josiah's brother before him. Every third generation, one born marked." Samuel tore the book in half and threw it into the fire. "You speak madness." But Thomas saw fear flicker behind his brother's anger. He knew. "Samuel," Thomas said quietly, "he knew what we would bring into the world." Outside, the fog thickened, pressing against the windows. From somewhere upstairs, the faint sound of a lullaby drifted down, Clara's voice, but layered now with another older tone. Samuel grabbed his pistol. "Enough. The woman's bewitched you." He stormed up the stairs, but the nursery door would not open. The wood pulsed beneath his hand, warm like living flesh. From inside came the sound of a child's laughter, low, rhythmic, wrong. Thomas followed slowly, trembling, clutching one burned scrap from the ledger. On it, only 3 words had survived the fire: "When the Watcher wakes." And as he pressed his ear to the nursery door, he heard something breathing on the other side. Not a child. Not quite human and not alone. The sound behind the nursery door was a rhythm. A heartbeat that wasn't bound to one body. It pulsed through the walls, through the air itself, until even the candles in the hall flickered with its beat. Samuel raised his pistol, his face pale and wet with sweat. "Step aside," he ordered. Thomas hesitated. "Don't go in there." Samuel shoved him hard against the wall and threw the door open. The nursery was dim, the curtains drawn tight. The crib sat in the center of the room like a shrine, surrounded by melted wax and dried petals. Clara stood beside it, her hair loose, her nightgown stained with what looked like soot. Her eyes were half open, yet unfocused, as though she was watching something far beyond the room. "Clara," Samuel said, his voice shaking. "Step away from the child." She didn't move. "You shouldn't be here, Samuel. He doesn't like it when you shout." Samuel leveled the pistol. "What have you done to this house, to my family?" Clara's head tilted slightly, a faint smile crossing her lips. "Not I. You and your father. You kept the blood whole, just like he asked. Now it's whole enough to open the gate again." Thomas's stomach turned cold. The gate. Clara's gaze shifted to him, and for the first time, her eyes looked entirely wrong, pupils stretched thin like cracks in glass. "Every Watcher must wake, brother," she said, her voice blending with another, low, ancient, inhuman. "And when he wakes, the door between what was and what will be opens again." Samuel fired. The sound shattered the quiet like thunder. Clara fell, but not completely. Her body hit the floor, yet her shadow remained standing, tall, still unbent. The curtains tore open as if caught in a wind, though no air moved. The crib began to shake. From within it came the baby's laughter, higher now, echoing, layered with something far older. The room filled with light, the kind that didn't illuminate but revealed. The walls peeled back, showing glimpses of impossible shapes beyond, roots growing through bone, rivers of eyes, a burning figure watching from the dark. Samuel screamed and fired again, though there was nothing left to shoot. When the light faded, Clara's body was gone. The crib stood empty. The window was wide open, though they were 3 stories high. On the floor beside it lay a small handprint, 6-fingered, seared black into the wood. And from the fog outside came the soft, unmistakable sound of a child's giggle, fading slowly into the trees. Thomas didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. The image of that 6-fingered print burned behind his eyes every time he blinked. The house was silent now, too silent. No servants, no horses, no sound from the wind or the trees outside. It was as though the world itself were holding its breath. Samuel sat in his study, staring at nothing, the pistol still in his hand. His hair had gone grey in the space of a few hours. When Thomas tried to speak to him, he didn't respond. Just whispered over and over, "It's done, it's done." But it wasn't. Near midnight, Thomas heard it again, the child's laughter, distant this time, somewhere beyond the fields. It rose and fell with the mist like a melody from another world. He grabbed his lantern and stepped out onto the porch. The fog swallowed him whole within seconds, but he followed the sound, drawn to it the way a moth follows fire. The woods were different now. The trees leaned inward, their branches curling like ribs around a heart. The deeper he went, the less the world looked like itself. Shadows bent in wrong directions, roots pulsed like veins, and the air carried a smell of rust and rain. Then he saw it, a faint glow ahead pulsing. He crept closer until the clearing opened before him. There, in the center, stood the child, Elias, naked, untouched by the cold, eyes bright with something that wasn't innocence. Around him circled dozens of small lights, will-o'-the-wisps, or perhaps souls, each one flickering like trapped breaths. "Elias," Thomas whispered. "Come back, my boy. Come back inside." The child turned slowly, his head cocking in that unnatural way only children and broken dolls do. "You came late," he said, though his lips didn't move. The voice was both his and another's, deep, echoing, too old to belong to flesh. "Late for what?" Thomas asked, trembling. "To open what's left." And the earth trembled. The ground beneath the child split, light pouring through the cracks. Light that wasn't sunlight but something alive, crawling upward like liquid fire. Through the blaze, Thomas saw shapes moving, limbs without bodies, faces forming and dissolving. The forest screamed, 1,000 voices all at once. He fell to his knees, covering his ears. "Stop, you'll destroy everything." The boy smiled, revealing teeth too sharp for a child. "No, uncle. I'll finish what you started." The ground heaved. A hand, vast and black and glistening like oil, rose from the earth, reaching for the sky. And just before it touched the treetops, a single gunshot echoed across the clearing. Samuel stood at the edge of the woods, pistol raised, smoke curling from the barrel. The child turned, unhurt, but now, for the first time, he looked afraid. The forest went silent after the shot, so silent that even the echo refused to return. Samuel stood at the tree line, his chest heaving, eyes wide and wild. The pistol trembled in his hand, but his voice came out steady. "Step away from that thing, Thomas." Thomas turned toward him, shaking his head. "He's not a thing. He's family. Family." Samuel spat, striding forward. "That's not blood, that's rot. Look around you." The child stood between them, staring blankly. The fissure beneath his feet still glowed faintly, like the last ember of a dying fire. The massive black hand that had emerged began to sink back into the soil, its fingers curling as if reluctant to let go. Thomas took a step toward Elias. "He can be saved. Whatever's inside him, it can still be stopped." Samuel aimed the pistol again. "There's only one way to stop it." Before he could fire, the boy spoke. His voice was no longer layered. It was clear now, almost gentle. "He won't let you hurt me, uncle." Samuel froze. "Who won't?" The woods answered for him. Every tree, every leaf, every root whispered a single name. Though it wasn't spoken, it was felt. The name of something older than words. The ground began to move again, slow and steady, like a heartbeat returning to life. Thomas stumbled back. "You'll kill us all if you shoot." Samuel gritted his teeth. "Then better us than the world." He pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, but the bullet never reached its mark. The air thickened between them, like invisible glass. The bullet hung suspended for a moment, then melted into a drop of light. The child blinked, and the world tilted. Samuel's body lifted from the ground, limbs flailing as though caught in unseen hands. He gasped, choking, his pistol falling uselessly into the grass. Thomas screamed, "Stop it, he's your uncle!" The child's expression softened. "He's in the way." With a sickening crack, Samuel's neck twisted, not violently, but with eerie precision. His body crumpled, lifeless, the fog swallowing him whole. Thomas dropped to his knees beside him, sobbing, his hands shaking over his brother's still chest. "God forgive us." The boy walked closer, his small bare feet leaving blackened prints in the soil. He knelt and placed his 6-fingered hand on Thomas's cheek. "Don't cry, uncle. He's not gone. None of them are. They're part of it now." And then Thomas saw the faint shimmer in the trees, faces flickering in the bark, in the mist, in the light itself. Samuel's, William's, Clara's, watching, waiting. The forest was alive, the watcher had awakened. The forest pulsed like a living thing. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Faces drifted in and out of the fog, familiar, warped, whispering words Thomas could not understand. The air hummed with power, deep and ancient, as if the earth itself was remembering something long buried. Thomas crawled backward, dragging himself away from Samuel's lifeless body. "Elias," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Listen to me, you don't have to do this." The boy tilted his head, curious, almost gentle. "Do what?" "This." Thomas gestured to the trembling ground, to the faces pressing out from the trees. "Whatever this is, you can stop it!" The child blinked. For a moment, his voice was small again, his own. "I didn't start it, Uncle. You did. All of you did." Then his expression changed. His eyes rolled back until they were white, and his voice deepened, layered once more with something older. The blood kept the door open. "I am only the one who steps through." The forest shuddered violently. The cracks in the ground widened, light spilling upward, no longer gold but red, raw like an open wound. A low sound echoed from below, a moaning that wasn't made by any living thing. Thomas stumbled to his feet, clutching the burnt scrap from the old ledger. Those 3 words scorched into it like a curse. "When the Watcher wakes." He looked down at Samuel's pistol lying in the grass, his brother's final defiance. His hand shook as he picked it up. The boy smiled. "You would kill your own blood." Thomas raised the gun, tears streaking down his face. "If it means ending this, yes." The wind howled, tearing at his coat. The light grew brighter, and the shape beneath the earth began to rise once more, vast and coiled, like something with wings made of shadow. "Don't," the boy whispered, not pleading, but commanding. "You'll close the door. And when you close it, you'll close yourself." Thomas pressed the barrel against his own temple. "Then let it close with me." The child's eyes widened, not in fear but in recognition. "You finally understand?" The light surged, blinding. Thomas pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the forest, and the world folded inward. The sound of cracking wood, of whispering faces, of wind turned to silence. The light vanished. When the fog lifted, the clearing was empty. No child, no body, no hand rising from the soil. Only the pistol lay there, half buried in the dirt, still warm. And on the nearest tree, carved deep into the bark, 6 faint finger marks formed a perfect circle, closing it. 83 years later, the Rutled estate was nothing but a rumor whispered by locals and feared by children. The woods had reclaimed it entirely, trees grown through crumbling chimneys, vines snaking through shattered windows, and roots coiling over what used to be the front steps like veins of an ancient corpse. No one went near it after sundown, until one autumn afternoon, a group of surveyors arrived from Raleigh. The state wanted to expand the highway, and the old plantation sat directly in its path. The men joked about ghosts as they unpacked their equipment, though none of them laughed long. The air inside the forest was colder than it should have been, thick with that sweet, iron smell of rain on old stone. "Smells like blood," one of them muttered, half laughing, half serious. They found the remains of the main house by dusk, rotted beams, sagging floors, the skeleton of a grand staircase that led nowhere. The youngest of them, Carter, wandered deeper into what had once been the nursery. There, beneath the collapsed ceiling, he found a strange circle carved into the wooden floor. It was perfect, too perfect to be made by hand. 6 finger-shaped grooves radiated from its center like a sun. "Hey," he called out. "You guys need to see this?" The others came, shining their flashlights on it. One of them chuckled. Probably some old ritual mark. These folks were superstitious as hell back then. Carter crouched closer, tracing one of the grooves with his finger. "Feels warm, warm," another man said. "That's impossible. The wood's been dead for decades." But Carter didn't answer. His face had gone still, eyes wide and unfocused. Then, softly, he began to hum, a tune that none of them recognized, yet all of them felt they had heard before. "Carter." He smiled faintly, not looking up. "He's waking." The floor beneath them shuddered. Dust fell from the ceiling. Something deep in the soil shifted, a heartbeat, slow and steady. "Back up," someone shouted, but it was too late. The circle split open, releasing a breath of hot, damp air that smelled of rust and ashes. From below, a single small hand reached up, blackened, 6-fingered, and very much alive. Carter took its hand without hesitation. The others ran crashing through the forest, too terrified to look back. They didn't see the light blooming behind them, or the shadow stretching across the trees, taller than the house itself. By morning there was nothing left of the estate, only the smell of smoke, and a faint sound drifting on the wind, soft, childlike laughter echoing through the fog, as if the forest itself were remembering. And miles away, in a Raleigh hospital, a woman gave birth to a baby boy. The nurse gasped softly when she counted the fingers. 6. Thus ended the house of Rutled. The camera would drift slowly through the ruins, roots curling over ash, shattered glass glittering in the half-light. The voice, low and steady, would guide the viewer through the silence. They called it a curse, a madness, a bloodline that defied God and time alike. But perhaps it was none of those things. Perhaps it was simply the price of preservation, the cost of keeping something too pure, too old, too whole. A wind whispers through the skeletal trees. A single door, still hanging by one hinge, sways open with a groan. In 1852, Samuel Rutled swore that his family's legacy would never die. He was right. Blood remembers, even when memory fades. And every few generations, it awakens again, quietly, patiently, waiting for a hand to open the circle. The camera pans downward. The earth shifts. Beneath the leaves, faintly glowing, lies the same six-fingered mark carved deep into the soil. They say the woods still hum on cold nights, that you can hear a child laughing among the trees, and that if you follow the sound, you'll never find your way back. A flicker, an image of the nursery, restored for a split second, the crib swaying gently though no one touches it. And somewhere in another town, another century, a child is born, a child who hums the same tune that was heard beneath those blackened trees. The screen darkens. Only the faint echo of laughter remains. Then the voice one final time. The Rutled bloodline was never cursed. It was chosen. And chosen things never die. They wait. A fade to black. The last sound a single heartbeat, slow and heavy, echoing once, twice, then silence. 2 months after the collapse of the Rutled estate site, an envelope arrived at the North Carolina Historical Society in Raleigh. No return address. No postage stamp. Just one word written across the front in a trembling hand. Remember. Inside was a leather-bound journal. Its pages brittle, the ink faded with age. The archivist who received it, a woman named Eleanor Hayes, logged it as unverified plantation correspondence, mid-19th century. But as she skimmed its pages, her breath caught. The handwriting matched that of Thomas Rutled. The entries stopped abruptly in 1852, but the last page chilled her to the bone. Written in smeared black ink, almost carved into the paper, were these words: "The door is never destroyed, only moved. It watches through the blood. When the six cries, the watcher wakes again." She tried to file it away with the others, but that night, alone in the archive, she heard something strange, a faint hum beneath the floorboards. It was rhythmic, almost musical, and though she searched the entire building, it never stopped. 3 nights later, the security guard found the journal open on her desk. The room smelled faintly of smoke. Eleanor was gone, but the camera footage told another story. At precisely 3:16 a.m., the lights flickered, and a small handprint appeared on the window, 6 fingers pressed in condensation. Seconds later, the glass cracked outward. The police dismissed it as vandalism. The file was sealed and the case forgotten. Years passed. The journal was misplaced, buried somewhere in the archives under mislabeled records. Until last year, when a graduate student scanning plantation logs found it again and uploaded it online. The file was taken down within hours, but not before it was downloaded by thousands. And some of those who read it began reporting strange things: the smell of rain on cold iron, the sound of a child's laugh in the background of phone recordings, fingerprints, 6 of them, left on fogged windows in homes that hadn't known children for years. No one can prove the journal was real. But then again, the Rutled line was never about proof. It was about inheritance, and some inheritances, once open, can never be closed. The screen stays black for a few seconds after the last line of narration fades. Then, slowly faint static flickers to life, like an old VHS waking up after decades of silence. A dim video recording begins. The camera shakes, handheld. Someone is breathing behind it. The shot pans across a desk cluttered with notes, printouts, and an open laptop screen showing a paused video. The documentary you've just watched. The voice behind the camera murmurs, I found something in the footage. Watch closely. The camera zooms in on one frame. The paused image shows the ruins of the Rutled estate. In the far corner, barely visible, there's a figure, small, child-sized, standing in the fog. It wasn't there before. The voice whispers. I checked every frame of the original. The lens adjusts again. The figure turns its head slightly. Its face is blurred, but you can count the fingers pressed against the glass. 6. Then, a faint sound, tap, 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 comes from somewhere off camera. The person holding the phone freezes. The tapping repeats, closer this time, like fingertips against the window. They turn toward the sound. The camera catches only darkness and reflection. In the reflection, your reflection, you can see a shape standing behind the person filming. The video cuts out. The screen fades to black again. A single sentence appears, white against the void. If you've watched this far, you've opened the door. A heartbeat echoes once, low, deep, and unmistakably human. Then another, then silence. The credits begin to roll, slow and deliberate. No music, only the soft hum that's haunted every frame since the beginning. But just before the final name fades, the hum stops, replaced by a faint, distant giggle. And then, one last flicker. A frame so brief most will miss it. A child's drawing, scrawled in crayon, 6 fingers, a red circle, and underneath it written in a shaky hand, "See you soon." The screen cuts to black forever.